good evening everyone, and welcome to the second of our Scale-Up sessions, a series of events about enterprise incubation and development for startups, which is produced jointly by Design Manchester and the Business and IP Centre at Manchester Central Library. I'm Kasper de Graaf. The theme of our session today is Cooperation Shows the Way Forward. In the wake of the pandemic, everyone, from Boris Johnson to Andy Burnham, from left to right and red to blue, talks about building back better or fairer and definitely differently. There is perhaps a greater awareness of how we all depend on one another and a desire to, shall we say, nurture the base of the pyramid. But what does that mean if you want to start a business? Has the time come to look at cooperatives not as something that's old-fashioned or on the margins, but as a business model for the future, one that can drive prosperity and success? To discuss that, we have a very fine panel who I'll introduce later, but we start with a scene-setting introduction, and for that, I'm more than delighted to welcome someone who for years has been at the forefront of supporting talent, opportunity and enterprise in Manchester, and who in the midst of the pandemic moved onto the national stage as Chief Executive of Co-operatives UK, the voice of the UK's thousands of independent co-ops. Rose Marley. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you very much, Kasper. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. I'm just going to spend 10 minutes or so demonstrating to you how I believe that cooperation can indeed show the way forward, and then we'll be very excited to join with the other panellists to discuss this further. So yeah, we cannot ignore obviously the pandemic. As I'm just going to start with what did COVID do in terms of why I believe that the power, the distribution of power and the distribution of wealth that the cooperative business model offers has become more important than ever, as Kasper says, in terms of building back better. So the pandemic absolutely exposed the inequalities in our society. You know, lots of people living very different lives and lots of different experiences. But without a doubt, that inequality was something that really began to resonate with people in the pandemic in terms of things like wanting to pay key workers more money and how important they actually are, not just to the economy, but to our community and to our lives generally. And then, of course, the pandemic also accelerated the opportunity with tech. And that's important because before the pandemic, what was already happening, as many of you, I am sure, are aware, was Industry 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. And this is why I truly believe that the next decade, or the decade that we're living in now, is absolutely going to be pivotal to the development of mankind. The cooperative movement has been sort of disrupting and challenging traditional business models for over 175 years now. But I believe that those guiding principles and values that the movement embody across their model are absolutely needed in this time of upheaval and challenge, and the speed at which we're going to be delivering change means that being able to hold on to principles and values that have stood the test of time for good, solid, ethical business will become more important than ever. So when we talk about a revolution, you know, the way that we live, work and consume is going to be completely and utterly transformed over the next decade. I cannot emphasize this enough. Later on, I'm going to talk about a philosopher called Bertrand Russell, who was writing in the 1950s. And you can see on the screen there what going to work might have looked like in his day. You know, lots of people all converged together in one space. And now those people, as you can see in that data farm there's lots of people communicating, but they aren't necessarily in one place. And the reason that I believe that this is going to happen so quickly and so effectively is because there's a whole series of tech developments that are some a little bit coincidentally, but some actually because of the drive for change. Things like space travel have really advanced our tech. But these developments are stacking up on top of each other with speed, and they are going to enable a new future, one that, the future that, our grandchildren will be living in will certainly not be recognisable by our grandparents. So some of the things that includes, that's the 5G networks and the rollout of 5G across the world. The advancements in hardware, 3D printers, robotics, nanotechnology, materials science, surging computer power. Increased open source means combining that with the 5G rollout, that means anybody could probably improve their anything at any time. And this is really going to transform, let's say, the way we live and work. Human collaboration with artificial intelligence, so AI as a service. The prediction is that by 2030, AI will be at human level of capability. And we really presented, through all sorts of media and culture, a real sort of dystopian future of that potential living with robots. But we'll come back to that, because I truly believe that we can be cooperative with our artificial intelligence, and that's what we need to do. And we're absolutely going to enter an era of instant fulfillment, not least with deliveries through drones. So this is all going to, at the same time, be enabled by, Web 3.0, or also known as the spatial web. And it's not a gimmick, is the point. Let's say when we see these presentations of the future, it's not just about the way we present it. It's about the way that we are ultimately connected. So if you start to think about that connection as a human sort of form, and if you consider, for example, that the artificial intelligence is our capability in terms of our brain and our thinking, and that our eyesight will be enhanced by VR, AR, mixed realities. That blockchain, an infinitely ability to retain information that's pretty unhackable becomes our memory. Automation is already transforming some of our working lives and the jobs that are available to us. And then we've got robotics as well. And if you think about all of that being connected, and then you add in things like the Internet of Things, connecting, everything together. Think about the human body. So if you bang your leg, for example, the first thing that happens is all that blood rushes to the site of the potential wound. It's why you get a bruise. And the reason the blood rushes there is because it's sending all the white cells to protect against the bacteria in the infection, and sending, I'm not great on biology, the fibrogen to heal the scar tissue. The point is, that happened in one part of the body and all those other areas connected. And then if it does penetrate and there's a wound and you do get an infection, you'll get a temperature, in another part of your body. If you start to think about the capability then of the world when everything is connected in a similar way, that we will get temperature, meaning the analogy, I don't mean the temperature in terms of climate change. I mean the temperature indicating where problems are coming from, and actually solutions, how to solve them, because we've got that infinite memory. Instead of, let's say, bang your leg, I bang my leg pretty much every morning on the coffee table, and it happens time and time again. I don't have that capability. But this is the point about us all being connected into one absolute space throughout the world. It's really going to transform our everything in ways that we really don't understand yet. So if you look at that and what I've said about that human collaboration, artificial intelligence as a service, I truly believe that we'll be entering a world where that will be really important. So if you look at cancer diagnosis now, it's already proven that AI can do that as effectively as doctors and human beings. Insurance companies will move from kind of payout and dealing with the damage to the prevention, because again, like I say, if you bang your leg, what are all the things that will come running to your aid? Well, actually, how do you stop that in the first place? And actually, when you start to think about that artificial intelligence, and like I say, you remove all those previously sort of like ideas of, maybe Terminator and what might happen to the world, and you start to think about it in terms of collaborating, well, then you've got to teach artificial intelligence how to collaborate. The deep machine learning needs to include things like honesty, openness. Those values of cooperation need programming now. There's a lot of there's a brilliant book, How to Talk to Robots, which I'd highly recommend. It's designed actually for predominantly a female reader, because they may be less interested in tech, is what the research demonstrates. But it's the idea, when people say thank you to Google and Google Dot and Alexa, actually you're teaching, that type of intelligence a response that's probably important. But in this book, it'll show you all the problems with the data sets, and all the unconscious bias that's in there. So I really believe that we need to start thinking about putting these values in at that stage. But there's also the principles, and the principles are what makes that business model for a cooperative. And when I talk about distributing power, the reason all cooperatives distribute power is because they operate on a one member, one vote basis. So that means that, if you put £50,000 in to develop a co-op and somebody else put £5 in, you're still only getting that one member, one vote, which means you get this parity, you get a difference in decision making. And that's what we're going to talk to some of our panelists about, actually, how that happens and how that comes about. So in terms of, some of those principles, when you start, I'm not going to go through them all now, they're very well documented, but when you start putting those into the context of tech, and the modern world that we're operating in, we call this platform co-ops, or collaborative tech. You start to get some really exciting opportunities for this point that Kasper made about how do we use business to build back better and more effectively. So right now, tech's dead clunky. I'm telling you that it's going to transform our lives, and you're probably thinking that might be a nightmare given the hassles it already gives you. It's clunky because we're at the beginning of the revolution, and it's actually profit driven because of the way that venture capital works and the way that those models have been designed, and the money needs paying back. That interest and investment needs paying back. So of course you end up with poor workers' rights and lack of social consideration. And you have this real monopoly in tech where the decisions and the wealth are shared by the few equity holders in that tech. We've seen a lot of monopoly in tech, as I'm sure you're aware. So when you start putting those principles into tech, you get some really exciting opportunities, of which we're going to be talking about some now. So for example, the Equal Care Co-op there is for care workers and the people that book the care. So the care workers are part of the app, which means that they get one member, one vote, which means, of course, that they get the better than real living wage. They also get the right conditions to work in. They get a limited number of clients. But of course, the people that are booking the care, it means that they know that the care that they're booking, either for their client, if it's a local authority, or for their loved ones, that they're booking people who've got the time and the space and the consideration to be able to do that job well and effectively, and can start building up a rapport and booking the people that they want to book. Up and Go is a cleaning co-op in Manhattan. It's a worker co-op. It's really fascinating looking at all around the world co-ops video of Up and Go, because these cleaners not only get, let's say, those social considerations in terms of better working conditions, but they're also reporting things like, much better dealings with their clients. But the fact that because they can rate their clients, they don't get poor orders. They even talked about, things like sexual harassment and all sorts of advantages in there. We're going to be talking with some of these platform co-ops shortly. So I'm not going to say too much about that now. And one of them came through this programme, the Unfound Accelerator, which is what Co-ops UK do. So if people have got ideas about how they might turn their co-op into an app or, a platform co-op, we're open for applications as of today for our next cohort, and you can find that on uk.coop if that's something that interests you, and we will be talking about that shortly. But again, we've also got, as well as what's happened with the pandemic, as well as what's happening with tech, we've also got a kind of new era of young people that are very different. Generation Z are very different to kind of millennials, and they are already quite aligned and akin to some of those values and principles. So again, the reason we need to invest in our young people in terms of understanding what that cooperative business model does, is because it really will work for this generation who are keen to share their equity. You see it in things like the fan-led football clubs that are increasingly growing, like FC United, not far from here. So I mentioned Bertrand Russell, and there's a sort of famous quote, particularly in the cooperative sector, that the only thing that will redeem mankind is cooperation. And this was said in 1954, and I believe this resonates and is more important than ever for all the reasons that I've just talked about in terms of the distribution of power and how that can play out through, like I say, the tech and the new generation coming through. But what I also wanted to touch on, and a little bit of a provocation in terms of people taking the time to understand the cooperative business model, is the distribution of wealth. So what all co-ops do is share that wealth and anchor that wealth in the communities that they operate in. So, co-ops, I'd say one of the most famous co-ops, certainly in the UK, is the Co-operative group, of which, the shop at the end of your street. What the difference is between, that shop and, other supermarkets that are available is that ultimately, not only do those members of that shop get a say every year at the AGM in things like modern slavery, and chickens was a big discussion at the last AGM that I attended, but you also absolutely know that when you shop at a co-op, that wealth is staying within that community. The group's model is, they put £15 million a year into charities, into those local areas. Lots of different ways of doing it. But if you're a worker co-op, for example, the fact that you're all working together, you're creating your own jobs within that community. So this model here from Claire's Centre for Local Economic Studies shows that kind of the further you go into less ownership by private business and more purpose, the greater the generative wealth is, as opposed to the extractive wealth. And just thinking about that in terms of pointed to the co-op group because it's very well known as an ethical business, and you might take another ethical business, like I'm going to use the example of the Body Shop, which does an incredible amount throughout the world for ethics and sustainability. However, it does float on the Brazilian stock exchange, and all that wealth left the UK a long time ago. So it's not to take away their ethics and sustainability, it's just to understand the difference. And in the context of where we are with the pandemic, not least with what's happening with Brexit, ultimately, we need to understand that the cooperative business model needs to be promoted to startups, to conversions, to all these people you're going to speak on the panel about now about how to do it, because I truly believe that that is what will enable us to redeem mankind. So over to you now, Kasper, to pick up that conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Rose, for such a thought-provoking and very interesting exposition. So now to discuss this more widely, I am delighted to introduce our panel. So Marianne Heaslip is an architect and associate principal at Urbed, which is a built environment design and research cooperative founded more than 40 years ago and based in Manchester. Urbed believes in building sustainable towns and cities and enabling good design. Marianne has a focus on sustainability with particular expertise in retrofitting and low carbon design, evaluating building performance and participative design, and she often works in collaboration with Carbon Co-op, another Manchester-based cooperative. Rich Mason is the founder and CEO of Wings, a cooperative food delivery platform that's launching in London to challenge gig economy giants like Deliveroo and UberEats with an equitable and ethical alternative. A former Deliveroo rider, Rich's personal experience is what motivates him to create something better. Intriguingly, he is a fellow of Newspeak House, a Orwellian-inspired organisation founded in 2015 that is described as the London College of Political Technologists. I'd be very interested to find out what that means. Journalist Alex King works at the Meteor, which is Manchester's independent media site. He has particular interest in the climate emergency, industrial relations, local government, and political economy. He covers a wide range of local and national stories, including the rolling developments in Greater Manchester's bus network. Alex is also the Meteor's communications and marketing lead. And last, but truly not least, Stephen Flower is known to many Design Manchester fans as the person who started and for many years ran the Coder Dojo sessions at the Sharp Project, teaching coding to school-aged young people. He is now a co-founder of Open Data Services Co-operative, a co-op that's been set up to help people to use and publish open data. They provide technologies, software, training and support, and they support using open data to promote social impacts. Stephen also chairs the technical advisory group of the United Nations International Aid Transparency Initiative. So that's our panel. Now, if you're in the audience and you have a question or a comment, please put it in the chat in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and I'll do my best to bring it into the discussion as we move forward. But to start with, perhaps what I could do is ask each member of the panel to explain how they, in their experience in a co-op, fit into this narrative that Rose was talking about.
We are a rider-owned food delivery platform. So you think about Deliveroo, you think about UberEats. We offer the same service, but structurally radically different because we're owned by the riders. So thinking about the impact of cooperation and how it intersects with technology, I was thinking about this earlier. And for me, there are all of these cooperative principles, but the one that's most relevant is this one about ownership and control. So we have all of these radical technologies coming down the track. We have AI, robotics, everything that Rose said up at the top. We have a slightly less glamorous technology. It's a platform that we use to do our business, and people order food and we use it to send the jobs to riders. So we've seen this space just taken over by these terrible companies that are using this technology to create jobs that are precarious, they pay poverty wages, but that's a choice. It's not inherent within the technology. So the application of being a cooperative is that this ownership, the control of how that technology is used, and the sort of jobs that are created with it are vested with the people who it affects, which is to say the riders. So we achieve scale. You're not going to see a sort of turning the screw on the restaurants, on the riders, as Deliveroo, UberEats, Just Eat have done. You're going to see reinvestment back into the business with increasing wages or decreasing commission. So for me, it's all about using cooperatives and that structure to place these technologies in the hands of the people who are going to guide them towards the beneficial social outcomes you want, rather than the detrimental social outcomes that you see from the venture capitalist-backed companies.
Great. So this is a type of the kind of platform co-op that Rose was talking about, except that this is essentially a worker-owned, whereas many of the platform co-ops are also user-owned as well, and user-owned. But in this case, it's worker-owned, if I understand it. Well, one thing, though, Rich, before we move on to another member of the panel, can you just explain what the political technologist is? Is that basically what you're putting into practice now, is it?
I would love to explain Newspeak House. It's a community, I would call it, in Shoreditch, North London. Welcome to everyone. So if you're around Northeast London, come along when it's just about to open up post-COVID. They do all sorts of amazing events about political tech or the politics of tech or ethical tech, civic tech. So yeah, it's an amazing community. It does these great events. Come on a Wednesday night for a social night, and then there is a residency as well. You sort of live immersed in that community, which I was for 6 months.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That's really interesting. Marianne, could I move to you and ask you back to that original question? How does your very well established co-op fit into the narrative that Rose was outlining?
Yeah, so what I should probably say first of all is that Urbed, although it's a long established organisation, we've only been a workers' co-op since 2006. And prior to that, it was a company, a not-for-profit company. So it was a slightly different setup, and the Manchester office basically set up as a worker co-op in 2006. And I think that was really an extension of a lot of the approach to the work that we do. So we believe that building better buildings, towns and cities is about engaging with the people who live there. So engaging with the people who work in your company seems like a kind of sensible extension of that, and having that degree of ownership and control as well, which I think cooperatives are probably more common than you might imagine among architecture and design organisations, but it's still not the main way that it's done. I think most architecture design firms, built environment consultancy firms, are set up as partnerships or limited company with a small group of partners or directors, that they make all the decisions, whereas we're a fully mutual organisation. So one member, one vote, everybody gets a say in how the business is run, which is interesting because it's enabled us to develop streams of work that and engage in things like myself. I've developed a lot of expertise around retrofit, and I've done that over the last 10 years as quite a young person driving that. So I started this one just before I was 30. Whereas traditionally in architecture, you don't really get a huge amount of decision-making power until you've got grey hair. And also, if you've got thinking about the kind of inclusion and diversity side of things, Urbed's a bit unusual as well in being majority women. And from probably not all from the traditional upper middle class backgrounds that a lot of designers come from, because if you want to buy into a partnership in an architecture firm, you normally have to have some money behind you, whereas a cooperative means fully mutual cooperative as we are. We've basically all bought in with a pound share, so we can it opens it up and basically means that we can have better conversations about how we run the business. It reflects how we work, and it's enables us to be more diverse as an organisation as well, which I think results in better designs and research.
Rose is just asking, what made you convert from a not-for-profit company to a workers' cooperative?
So there were probably a couple of things at play, one of which is that some of the people who were there at the time were great believers in the cooperative movement. So David Rudlin was involved in Homes for Change. And then the other thing was, because we were separating off from the London part of the organisation, and you're setting up a newish kind of new organisation in Manchester. It should be a co-op, shouldn't it?
Yes. Okay, great. Well, that's a good enough answer for now. So could we go to Alex? Alex, how does the Meteor fit into this story? How long have you been around, and how does it actually work?
Sure. So the Meteor has been around in various guises for the most part of the last decade, but we incorporated formally in 2019. So we've been a co-op for 2 years, and I joined the co-op at around almost exactly around that time. I think it fits into Rose's narrative, and I think Rose's narrative seemed to centre on sort of themes of exploitation and disruption as a means of countering that. And it just occurred to me that, you know, the co-op movement was born in the Northwest, and the Rochdale Pioneers, just down the road from Manchester, those guys were responding to the mechanisation of the Industrial Revolution, which was forcing them into poverty, and they banded together to sort of counter that. So central to that, and in a kind of similar spirit, where we kind of emerge out of a similar technologically driven transformation. So historically, newspapers made money from ad revenue. And it was incredibly lucrative until the turn of the century, when the internet came along and social media came along, and advertisers deserted physical newspapers in favor of sites like Google and Facebook, and where they could target consumers much better, and where conversely lots of readers could access lots of information for free. So that's kind of the conjuncture at which the meteor enters, that breakup of the public sphere and the downfall of advertising model of journalism, local journalism particularly. And so there is a sense of history kind of rhyming there, and it's in that spirit of disrupting the pre-existing business model that we exist, really. And the way that it works is that it's all run, so it's owned and run by its members, and of that membership we have a core team who manage all the day-to-day management of the co-op and produce the vast majority of the content as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thanks very much. What I'd like to do at this point is just ask Caitlin and Chris from Good Praxis in London to come in and talk about their experience. Hi, Caitlin and Chris.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, so we incorporated in April 2019 as a digital cooperative. There are 5 of us now, and we largely work with impact groups. And it could be established groups or grassroots organisations, or gaming and entertainment companies. So it's kind of like quite a broad range of clients that we work with. And recently have developed our branding faculties as well, which I'm quite pleased about. Yeah, I'm not sure.
And then, so I'm actually celebrating my year anniversary of joining the co-op today. And yeah, in terms of like working together and working in this kind of flat structure, I was a freelancer before this, and I joined during the pandemic. So it was a real kind of story of like, I don't know, remembering that actually it's really lovely to work with people and work in a team. And this kind of structure just makes so much more sense to any that I've kind of been involved in before. In fact, that kind of hierarchy made so little sense to me that that's kind of part of my motivation for having gone freelance in the first place. It just didn't make sense to me. And yeah, that kind of balance works its way through our organization. We have a nice balance of 2 developers and 2 designers. Yeah, it works really well. We have the luxury of kind of working on projects that we enjoy doing, or that are kind of meaningful in some way.
I think that sorry, just to mention sociocracy, and that's how we sort of make decisions. That works really well in a company like ours, especially when everyone has things. This is probably true for every company, but everyone has things to bring to the table and ideas that need to be heard, and especially within design. So I'm from an advertising background, and that's very hierarchical. And sometimes you often look at the outputs that larger design agencies come out with, and it's not really at the forefront or especially innovative. That's because they do rest on established tropes and established power structures, and I find it doesn't really lead to the most interesting work. So it really lends itself well to digital design, right?
Yeah, and helps people that have might still be kind of developing their sense of identity in design, and like finding their feet as a designer, as I was when I joined Good Praxis. It allows, like, having a flat structure allows creativity to flourish, and kind of really gives confidence to you, because you're not kind of concerned about where your place is in the organization. So I think from that perspective, it's really enabling, and yeah, I would really recommend it for anyone that's kind of still finding their feet in their discipline.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to ask a question. It's really to Rose, but then it's to everyone. And because, Rose, I think what you're saying is that there's a real, of course, tech is very important in terms of what we know what's happening, but there's a real opportunity for startups and to set themselves up as co-ops. And you're obviously promoting the cooperative sector as a whole. But if you look at the cooperative sector as a whole, 71.5% of it, £28 billion, is retail. And then another 20% of it is agriculture. And if you look at the next biggest one, which is sports and recreation, is 1.9%. And so things like health and care is still very important because it's 129 million, but it's a very small part of the overall cake, and digital and tech are even smaller. So I'm wondering how we can grow the sector across the piece. It seems very lopsided at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating this because it is big numbers. It's worth 39 billion to the UK, this sector, and if you compare that to, say, the music industry, 5 billion. Yeah, so if you think about it, so when you say it's small, it's not small. And actually, even when you go to those small businesses, this is the point, really. If you've got like a digital co-op like Stevens that's turning over, up to £1 million, that's really valuable in the locality. That's quite a few jobs and that's a lot of opportunity. So I do get a bit like, when we kind of put out, because the retailers do so well, that doesn't take away, for me anyway, the importance of all the other sectors. So there's that kind of context for it. But in terms of the growth, like I say, that VC model in tech, there is a very positive thing that the VC models does, which is disrupt the market. So all that money that Deliveroo have put in has enabled Rich. Rich couldn't have done that on his own. So there is a bit about them breaking the market that has a value with us coming behind it. But that whole model, the U curve, that's spending loads and loads of money until it goes, and the way it works. And I come actually out of the music business, and that's how you do bands. Like I remember, we used to work with EMI, and they used to say sign 10 artists a year, and 9 of them had cost them millions and flop, and one of them at that particular year was Robbie Williams, and it paid for all the rest, and that level of cash and money that goes in the VC model means that then the interest needs paying, and it needs paying out of the company, and that's when the margins get squeezed. I believe the alternative to that is in some of the, we've got to do a lot of work with government, because governments don't enable the cooperative model very well, actually, on lots of levels. But there's something called community shares, which you can only access if you're a co-op or a community benefit society, which is a type of co-op. And it's like, community shares are like crowdfunding, but with equity. Is the best way to describe it. So you can create these share offers and allow your members, so if you're starting something like a record label, you can invite all the people that want to be a part of it to put money in at that stage. And Co-ops UK does offer a booster pound for pound match at the moment on community share offers. So I believe that it won't be easy, but it'll get easier because, like I say, the markets are disrupted and being broken. But we've got to kind of get in the mix with the monopoly to do that. But like I say, it's not to take away, just because they're smaller, it's not to take away how large actually and important they are in the context of jobs and happiness and generative wealth and things that really actually matter to people.
Yeah, so it's very relative, this question of size. It's really about size in relation to what. And what is interesting in the cooperative economy report that you've just brought out is the ambition that exists within co-ops. They're all very eager to grow, and they're much more optimistic about growing than businesses outside the co-op sector, by the look of it. So the worry for people who don't know anything about co-ops looking at it from the outside is that the traditional model is, you have experience, people who have experience at the top of the business, they know it gives you kind of comfort, and this model here where you've got everybody making decisions from day one on an equal level, kind of challenges that. So, but
Kasper, can I just jump in on that? Because that's one of the things. The worker co-op model is very much about that, about everybody making an equal decision on a daily basis, and that's one type of model. But the multi-stakeholder co-ops, will have a more, co-op group has a more traditional structure where there is still an exec and a board, and the decisions are at AGM level. So in my Co-ops UK is a co-op. My members are other co-ops. It's like a trade body. So, at our AGM, all those other co-ops made important decisions for the rest of the year. I am an employee.
Yeah.
I don't in any way own or get to participate in those decisions at Co-ops UK. I work for a board who works for its members. So that's what I'm saying about. That's why co-ops present as complex, because it's not a one size fits all answer. But actually, that's the beauty of it. It depends what you want to achieve. You might be tenants of a housing association. However you want to do it, there will be a model. But it doesn't always have to be that everybody gets to make decisions on absolutely everything.
On absolutely everything, but it's still delegated decision making, isn't it, by the members ultimately? So, Stephen, welcome. It's
hello,
great to
can
see
you hear me?
And maybe I can ask you now how Open Data Services Cooperative fits into the narrative that we've been evolving here.
Open Data Services, very quickly, we've been around 6 years. There are 19 of us now. And we're about to recruit. So I just noted we're talking about growth. We've got a job out now. We're hoping to recruit 6 more people. And what's really interesting, the point I wanted to add just in the mix was that we're creating digital products in the public domain. And we really do not have any products or things that we own. We develop them with our clients. Open data and transparency is a key and part of that, and I think that's a really interesting part. We choose to be a cooperative. We choose to have control and ownership of the business, but equally also we don't have any products that we own or anything that we're trying to sell into the market. Our most expensive part of our business is the people, our wages, and the most valuable part of the cooperative is the people as well.
Well, that's very interesting. This thing about how co-ops work and what for. There's a question that Malcolm Garrett has asked, which is, what is the corporate process for scaling up the size of a cooperative beyond the founding group of members, first of all? Is there an ideal or a maximum size for a cooperative? And then he mentions as an example that Time Out magazine in London was famously a cooperative for many, many years, but eventually changed its structure to a conventional hierarchy when it got much more so-called successful. Who wants to come in on that one?
Yeah, I can happily come in on elements of that, and I think this is one of the. It's interesting the Time Out magazine example that you've used there, because, like I say, some of the challenges around being a cooperative are also benefits if you kind of work through it and get that right advice. But in terms of the way that it works for like a maximum size of a cooperative, that is the challenge. When it's really interesting to hear Stephen, or what I'd like to ask Stephen, you saying you're recruiting for 6 people, because how do you deal with people who are just looking for a job and then suddenly they're like, well, I'm not really bothered about all this stuff, I just wanted a job, and and like that, I'm dead interested in that. But in terms of size, Suma's a good example. Suma Whole Foods, which if any of you have been into the Unicorn, which is a co-op in Charlton, you'll see all the Suma Whole Foods products there. And they're in Yorkshire, and they've got 300 people now, and they started with about 6. And I was talking to one of the leading members about the challenge, about how as you grow, it's really unrealistic to be able to have 300 people making decisions on absolutely everything. And again, Unicorn Co-op, they're very happy with the size that they're at. So you talk about this ambitious. Some co-ops don't want to grow. They're really happy. We're really happy. We've got a bunch of people. We all work really well together, and that's fine. And we're really cool with that. So I guess, in simple answer is there is no ideal size. Like I say, if you look at Co-op Group, it's a co-op and it's got thousands and thousands of employees, but that's a customer-driven model. And like I say, Suma are having to re-look at the way they make some of those decisions because they are growing. But it's important, I believe, that if you retain that idea that somewhere along the way, that parative decision-making on important big subject matters is absolutely where you return to your values and principles. And that's why I was saying they've stood the test of time. The amount of people that turned, I know Stephen, sorry I keep bringing you, but I've asked you all this, but the way you guys made your decisions in the pandemic was very much driven by those values and principles. So yeah, I mean, over to you, Stephen, really, in terms of, you're recruiting for 6 people. Do they have to have a cooperative mindset? What if they just want to get paid and go home?
Well, we all want to get paid and go home, or leave the desk that's at home, I think. So, yeah, having that control and ownership, I think, is really clear and key. Well, I think a common myth about co-ops, maybe, particularly worker co-ops, is that we are sat around trying to make decisions together about everything all day. And that's just not true at all. A big decision, recruiting 6 people, I always believe you've got to go into the room and look everybody in the eye, and virtually, digitally, however, and talk about what are we trying to achieve? Do we have the money? What's the plan? What's the project? So a decision like let's recruit 6 people doesn't happen overnight or in one meeting. It's just, I think, a big decision for us all as a group. We have different forms of decision making. We don't just have consensus. We have consent, or we give people a mandate to make their own decisions. So there's lots of variations and disaggregations or such things about how we operate the co-op. It's not just about us doing the decision making in the same way, in the same format. One thing I should add as well, we all get paid the same. We all have the same salary in the co-op, and we don't have a hierarchy. Nobody is in charge of each other. And I think when you start to get rid of some of that the stuff around hierarchies and who's paid more than I and such things, it does flush out a load of stuff that you might have in other workplaces, in my experience. So equalizing things like that is quite an interesting.
I think that's really attractive, particularly for a startup in the early days of a company. Of course, it doesn't apply to the co-op or John Lewis partnership. I don't know if it applies to Co-operatives UK, but anyway, it is. It's obviously, as Rose says, there are so many different models. Something I've been wondering though, and some of you running co-ops might comment on this, whether you, as a co-op, have needed to raise money for. I know that Rose has been talking about community share offers, which sounds really exciting, but whether you've needed to raise money to scale your operation, to make things work, and whether you have found being a co-op an obstacle when you start talking to people about raising money. Yeah, Rich.
Yeah, thank you. I think that this is going back about 10 minutes to your last question, Kasper, how do we grow the cooperative tech sector specifically? I think tech is uniquely difficult for this. And I think this is something to be really clear on. Rose talked about VC venture capital funded tech. We're in a position now where venture capital funding is the accepted form of starting most tech businesses, right? And this has a number of implications. These are the investors who are willing to make very high risk investments and see most of their companies fail, because there's a belief when you have these tech businesses that the small proportion that succeed will be very successful. And you'll make 1,000 times your initial investment if you've invested in Amazon early. And there's something good to that. There's something good that these small tech startups can get off the ground and get access to a large amount of money. But ultimately, I argue this is part of the big picture why we have awful tech companies that harm society, because the ones that make it have to make 1,000 times their original investment, and they become very extractive structurally. So coming back to the more recent question, as a co-op, we can't do it. The whole main route of funding a tech business is closed to us because we can't take venture capital funding, so it's extremely hard. And raising the capital gets talked about a lot in platform co-ops, in technical co-ops. It's extremely hard. We have some funding from Islington Council, which is great, and we're very grateful. We're having to pull together with sort of strings and sellotape for a fraction of what an early stage private startup taking venture capital would be able to access at this stage. So it's very hard.
Well, a question that's kind of relevant to that, David Randall asks, can co-ops benefit from the government's Kickstart scheme if a new member joins as a member rather than an employee? £1,500 is helpful to help a new member to settle in. I appreciate that doesn't quite address your VC question, by the way, Rich, but still, it's relevant. Do co-ops benefit from the Kickstart scheme? Do you know, Rose?
I'll let Marianne jump in, but sadly, I'm not seeing many people benefiting from Kickstart at the moment, and that's whether you're a co-op or not. They've just not got their act together, sadly. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a challenge. But go on, Marianne, I saw you jump in there.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of exactly that in theory, yes, but yeah, I think people are struggling a little bit with the bureaucracy on that one. Not for Urbed, but I know of other people who are trying. But the other point I was going to make is that if you're an employee of a worker co-op, you are a member usually, and members are employees. Those two things kind of go together in a worker co-op. Because we have a 6-month probation period where someone is an employee but not a member, but provided that they are happy at the end of that and we're happy at the end of that, they become members and have the opportunity to become a director as well. So yeah, the two things go together. I just wanted to say something on the pay issue as well, if that's, because someone else had raised that in the so we don't have a flat pay structure, and that is partly to do with, well, largely to do with the whole issue of responsibility and experience. So someone like myself who's an associate principal, I'm kind of running jobs. I'm legally responsible for things like health and safety on construction sites, and to get to that position has taken nigh on 20 years of study and experience. So that level of responsibility is compensated for, but we do, and conversely as well, someone who joins straight from university isn't expected to take on that level of responsibility, and we acknowledge that they're still learning and we support them to learn. But we do have a completely transparent pay structure, which is something that's very rare, I think, among design firms. So everybody knows what everyone gets paid, and it's set at kind of reasonable multiples. And we all work on the basis that we're all paid a proper salary rather than kind of a minimal salary and then dividends as well, because we kind of quite like the idea of paying all our taxes properly too, which is, yeah. So
if we go back to this question of funding growth of the business and how you can take it forward, I think the tech sector is, as you pointed out, Rich, is a little bit different from others. But Marianne and Caitlin and Chris and Alex, I think you in growing your businesses would be looking more to conventional ways of, like, bank loans or other forms of investment to take things forward. So have you found funding growth a particular obstacle, a particular difficulty, or not?
I think I'll just say very quickly, we've been quite lucky in that we've basically bootstrapped our way. So, and that's probably part of the thing of being a co-op and being, nobody is at Urbed, I don't think, in order to reap massive financial rewards. So the idea of reinvesting in the business so that we can carry on doing interesting and worthwhile work is kind of where we're at. Yeah. But we're lucky to have kind of had a long time to build that up as well.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the Meteor?
So I think with the initial incorporation, we were quite fortunate to be able to rely on a really, really rich cooperative scene here in Manchester. And a lot of our donors were co-ops. And we often negotiated a deal with the co-ops. So in exchange for sort of, helping us get off the ground, we ran a cooperative Manchester series. So we profiled each co-op in a sort of Q&A style profile and published it just to get the word out. So we did that with Unicorn. We did that with Homes for Change. And that was really successful.
It's a kind of advertorial revenues, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. And that's carried on into other kinds of sponsored content that we're doing, not with co-ops, but with community-led organisations, like community-led housing organisations in Greater Manchester. One of the challenges that we face, obviously, is as a media co-op, is growing your readership, growing your audience. We're always trying to increase that, and so there is always a challenge to produce more content and to get more people subscribed to the Meteor in order to then pay for the journalists to produce more content. And so the membership, in an ideal scenario, there's other media co-ops a bit further down the line, a bit more mature, like the Bristol Cable in Bristol has been around for 5-6 years, and I think they have 2,000 members, over 2,000 members, 2,200, and their membership subs contribute, I think, about a third of their overall funds, but the rest of that comes from fundraising, so applying to organisations like Nesta and until last year the European Union. And we're always, that's kind of an annual iterative process for us. So in an ideal world, you would be totally financially autonomous and, you know, able to get by on your subs. But I think in reality, we are still heavily reliant on those big grants.
I think a really interesting thing is that this question of how to set up a co-op, how to grow a co-op, you know, it's a fast-moving field. We're in a kind of rapidly changing world and situation. And what Co-operatives UK is doing is really great, so that if startups are thinking of setting themselves up, or entrepreneurs thinking of setting themselves up as a co-op, or indeed existing businesses wanting to switch to being a co-op, they should get in touch with Co-operatives UK and get advice on how to deal with these things. I mean, I think that going back to this question of tech, because Rose, you raised it really as the most important thing, you know, of bringing cooperative thinking into the tech sector. And I think, Rich, you're demonstrating, you know, that is a really valuable thing to do, and it's self-evidently the case. But we also know it's a real problem in terms of the funding model for tech. But, you know, thinking back to, you know, the beginning of this conversation in the 60s with Harold Wilson talking about the white heat of technology, you know, at that time, what people were thinking was technology was going to basically, robots were going to do the work and people were going to have leisure. What they didn't realize was it was the owners of the robots who had the leisure and everybody else didn't have any money. And that's the real problem that we're trying to redress now. And so I think it's very interesting what Rich is doing and what Stephen is doing, and the kind of this tech question that you raised, Rose, so important. But obviously there's still a nut for us to crack to try and support that sector in really being able to become, you know, as significant as it could be. Isn't it, Rose?
Yeah, completely. And let's say that, you know, it's not just the tech. The tech, you can't get away from tech. It's growing, it's developing, so that's why it's important. But actually, what's really important, just to bring it back down to the heart of the matter, is that this distribution of power and wealth will create a fairer and more equitable future for us all, and we need to enable this as a business model unleash its potential. Is what I would wanted to come and talk about today. So just to encourage startups, conversions, we've seen lots of different ways of doing it, and always pick up the phone or drop a note to Cops UK, and we can, I wish Time Out we could have helped Time Out to remain. Definitely, we could have helped them restructure. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
well, I think it's great. I mean, we're going to have to draw to a close. People are already having to leave because it was scheduled for an hour, of course. But what I'd say is, what we're going to do is we will edit this program, put it online, so that people can still see it, and we'll put all the contact details on it. But it is uk.coop, isn't it, Rose? If you want to find out more about these things. And if you go to designmcr.com/sus for scale-up sessions, all the information and the link to the program will all be on there. And do please get in touch with us if you want any information about how to set up a co-op or how to take it forward, and we'll try and put you in touch with the right people. And I particularly want to thank the team at Business and IP Centre at Manchester Central Library for helping us to run this series. And with that, the discussion always gets interesting just when you want to close it. We're going to have to draw it to a close. So thank you all very, very much indeed.